Everyone. I'm Art Jones, and this event that we're doing today is just kind of the result of some conspirational planning on the part of Haider Khan and I. We've been talking probably about 2 years, right? We've been talking. We discovered this common interest in Paul Robeson and sort of his background and legacy, among many other things. And at first, we were thinking that we would plan some really grand event on campus that would honor this man. I think both of us feel like he's one of these giant figures of the 20th century that almost seems missing in action in our current conversation in history. And it's, to me, it's a tragedy that that's the case. There was a time in the early part of the 20th century when Paul Robeson was the most famous artist in the world. And if you ask people today who Paul Robeson is, many very educated people will draw a blank. I remember a few years ago, I just out of curiosity ran this question by some of my colleagues when I was in the psychology department about Paul Robeson, and they were like, Paul who? And that it just really saddens me. So I think that it's really helpful for us to think about what Paul would be saying and doing if he were alive today, and facing all the issues that we face. He was a guy who was an all-American athlete at Rutgers University, born in 1898. He became a famous actor. He was an attorney. He was involved in international freedom-fighting activities throughout his career. At one point, he was vilified after he became a hero and his passport was taken away. All these things that happened, but he remained steady throughout his whole career in terms of his commitment to social action and social justice. So what I'd like to do is get us started by singing a song that, for me, embodies what Paul Robeson really stood for and how he thought about himself. Starting pitch here. Tell God all my troubles when I get home. Gonna tell God all my troubles when I get home. Gonna tell God all my troubles. I'm gonna tell him over and over. I'm gonna tell God all of my troubles when I get home. Gonna tell God the road was rocky when I get home. Gonna tell God the road was rocky when I get home. Gonna tell God the road was rocky. Tell him over and over. I'm gonna tell God all of my troubles when I get home. Gonna tell God how you'll treat me when I get home. Gonna tell God how you'll treat me when I get home. Gonna tell God how you'll treat me. I'm gonna tell him over and over. I'm gonna tell God all my troubles when I get home. But also the reflection of how I discovered Paul Robeson, which is that many of you know I started a nonprofit called the Spirituals Project that is about keeping the songs that enslaved Africans created and first sang alive. And Robeson is right at the center of that story.
And thank you all for coming. The room looks quite full now. It's really a rare privilege to be able to do something on Paul Robeson, who after our introduction certainly needs no introductions. I feel humbled actually by the experience, and I want to thank Art for preparing this excellent, very moving documentary with those various clips. And still, the man was much more complex than what it appears to be. But you got some idea. I'm not going to really reminisce about Robeson, meeting him, etc. I'm going to remember him. And another really wonderful African writer who used to be known as James Ngugi, but now has adopted the Kikyu name. Kikyu is a language in Kenya, modern Kenya. Ngugi wa Thiong'o. He talks about remembering with a hyphen between re and memory. It's not just applicable to Africa, which has been torn apart and fragmented. It applies to, of course, the black people here. It applies to everyone, actually, if you look into it very deeply, because we are all fragmented, in especially modern conditions, the kind of lives that we are compelled to lead, no matter how free we think we are. And Paul Robeson really shows us that it is possible to heed to that deep cry for freedom, deep cry for remembering all our fragmented parts, both outside and, even more importantly, inside the person. And the two are connected in a dialectical way. You cannot really be free inside, no matter how individualistic you think you are, if the outside is not free. If other people are in chains, you cannot be free. You cannot be out of your chains. And that is, I think, a very important lesson that I personally draw from Paul Robeson. And he illustrates for me something that another great poet of negritude, in fact, he coined the word negritude, Aimé Césaire, wrote in one of his poems, and I'll just read you the few lines that I think really resonate with me, and I hope will resonate with you. Césaire says, "No race possesses the monopoly of beauty, of intelligence, of force, and there is a place for all at the rendezvous of victory." And this is exactly what I think Robeson's life illustrates for us. I talked about his complexity, or just mentioned it, and he made a lot of mistakes in his life. We already have made a lot of mistakes in our lives. I certainly have. But there is another moving poem, perhaps by the greatest German poet of the 20th century, and Helmut Schmidt, who was a social democrat, but a much better educated social democrat than most people are. He once said that if he had to choose 3 German poets, they would be Goethe, Heine, and Bertolt Brecht. And this is from a poem by Brecht. It's called An die Nachgeborenen, to the future generations. And he says at the end, "But we know full well, even hating poverty deforms the face. Even rage against injustice makes the voice hoarse. Alas, we who animals and humans finally become helpmates to one another, do not judge us too harshly. And I think we need to remember that when we become too critical about the people from those days. The situation they faced was really extreme situation. And when Paul Robeson in 1937 said that art couldn't be a new problem when there was fascism arising, he was exactly right. We don't have that luxury today also, I would say. Now, Robeson was an internationalist. He is revered and respected and remembered much more abroad than here, which is one reason why we are doing this. He actually became an internationalist when he was in England. And he participated, Art referred to that briefly, in solidarity with the Welsh miners in their march to London against the working conditions or non-working conditions that they were facing because the owners have locked out the mines. So the movie that was made, which actually our library has, and I recommend you viewing it if you haven't done so, The Proud Valley, actually is a close reflection of actual experience. It's not something that somebody dreamed up. And then Robeson played the role, the leading role, because he was an actor. So it is art and life fused together. And I think that is something that we have to remember about Robeson's internationalism all through his life. And Robeson's own awareness that the struggle here was connected with the struggle abroad and vice versa was something that he always kept in mind. And along with his works that I just mentioned, and we saw during the documentary how he maintained his integrity throughout the terrible years of 1950s. Even reading about them really, makes you get that creepy feeling. And it's not quite over yet. When I look at my American colleagues and I see how afraid they are, how they actually rationalize all the cowardice that would be immediately obvious to a child, in their political behavior especially, but in other areas of behavior too. I can't but help remember the great lesson of courage that Paul Robeson really has left for us. If we only care to look, we can actually find that here is an inspirational figure. If I need courage, I can go to Paul Robeson. If I need hope, I can go to Paul Robeson. If I need to understand that working together, people actually can struggle against great injustice, against great odds, and sometimes succeed. That is Paul Robeson's life and his example and his internationalism, which we need today, because today the world is in crisis. The crisis is going to get deeper and deeper and deeper, and the hope really is, especially the young people of the world, the students we teach, and the students we don't teach. They are really, really important. And so the message is for everybody, but especially for the young people of today. The other thing, before we finish by singing two songs about Robeson, is that he has, in spite of all the complexity, all the weaknesses that you can point to, a certain kind of purity. There is a song that he sang about Joe Hill, actually, the purest kind of man. He sings about Joe Hill, but actually Robeson himself exemplified that kind of purity, I'd say. And these are some lines from a poem that I wrote some time ago, which really applies to him. Before we go to those two songs, I want to finish this speaking part with these lines. So much must be laid bare, just so we can once again speak in our own tongues. Just so we can once again turn to the sun without violence. Just so, one lone bird can sing once again on one snow-covered branch. So we will finish with two songs. First one is in Bengali, which is my mother tongue, and this shows the international recognition of Paul Robeson. Nazım Hikmet was a great Turkish poet and was in jail for many, many years for his views, wrote a poem about Paul Robeson. That poem has been translated into many languages of the world, including my mother tongue, Bengali, by another great poet, Subhash Mukhopadhyay. And then another great fighter in the cause of justice, Himango Bishwas, set it to music in the 1940s in actual struggle. So this is not a song that people just sang because they wanted to admire and appreciate Paul Robeson, which of course they did, but they used it in their own struggle, in their own fight for justice. And let me read the translation. I will sing only part of this in Bengali. Let me read the translation, that my inadequate translation of the part that I will sing. They don't allow us to sing, Paul Robeson, artist and fighter. They don't want us to sing your songs. They don't want us to sing our songs. Look, Robeson, look and see. In all corners of this earth, in all the streets and fields, even in the clouds and rivers, in the heart of everyone, we hear your songs of struggle, Robeson. People in pain everywhere, unite in your songs, rising up to revolt. Okay, and with me is my beloved teacher, respected teacher, Mr. Jaginder Singh Virdi, who is a great musician himself, and he has actually composed some. The next song we will sing together in Hindi is actually a translation, rough, loose translation of Old Man River. Mississippi becomes the Ganges. What else? But the message is the same, so I don't need to translate that. We'll sing a part of that, but first we'll sing the song that Nazım Hikmet did in honor of Paul Robeson, that still inspires people in many parts of the world in their struggle.
So is that one you want the images?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. গাইতে দেয় না শিল্পী সংগ্রামী রোবেসন ওরা আমাদের গান গাইতে দেয় না শিল্পী সংগ্রামী রোবেসন ওরা আমাদের গান গাইতে দেয় না শিল্পী সংগ্রামী রোবেসন আমরা তোমারই গান গাই ওরা যায় না আমরা তোমারই গান গাই ওরা যায় না শিল্পী সংগ্রামী Paul Robeson শিল্পী সংগ্রামী Paul Robeson শিল্পী সংগ্রামী Paul Robeson তুমি চেয়ে দেখো Robeson তুমি চেয়ে দেখো Robeson পৃথিবীর প্রতিকূলে পথ প্রান্তরে মেঘ নদী জনতার প্রতি অন্তরে আমারি সংগ্রামের গান শোনা যায় রোবসন সারা দুনিয়ার শোষিতের এক ভাই রোবসন শিল্পী সংগ্রামী রোবসন ওরা আমাদের গান গাইতে দেয় না শিল্পী সংগ্রামী রোবসন Robeson, Robeson. Now the old man prefer Ganges. Ganga. Ganga, 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 behti ho isar hai kare haakar nishabd sada o Ganga tum Ganga behti isar hai par kare haakar nishabd sada o Ganga behti ho kyun नेति कथा नष्ट हुई मानवता भ्रष्ट हुई निर्लज्ज भाव से रहती हो इतिहास की भाई करे हुंकार तो गंगा की धार निर्मल लज को सबल संग्रामी समग्रगामी बनाती नहीं हो क्यों विस्तार है हमारे प्रजा करे हाहाकार निशब्द सदा ओ गंगा तुम ओ गंगा बहती हो क्यों अनपढ़ जन अशरहीन अनहीन जन खाद्य वही नेत्री वही नहीं मौन इतिहास की पुकार करे हुंकार तो गंगा की धार निर्मल जन को सबल संग्रामी समग्रगामी बनाती नहीं हो क्यों विस्तार है अपार प्रजा तुम पार करे हाहाकार निशब्द सदा ओ गंगा तुम ओ गंगा बहती हो क्यों ओ गंगा बहती हो क्यों Thank you.
So we want to invite Alan Gilbert, who is also a distinguished professor at Cornell School, to come up and maybe give some closing remarks or some reflections from those remarks. Thank you.
Well, I too am humbled to be here. And Haider and I are old and dear friends. He was in my first courses here as a graduate student before he transferred to Cornell. And it is fitting to Paul Robeson that the songs are international songs in Bengali and in Hindi. If you want to understand Paul Robeson, think of somebody who's like 90 times smarter than you are, who learned 20 languages and sang in many of them, and fought for people all over the world, and brought Africa here. Brought Africa here at a time he was thrown away by the elite, including the black middle class, whose names some of the black middle class people who were in the civil rights movement deserve memory. But many of the names, including Mr. Hoover's, deserve to be forgotten. A year ago at a conference about my book, Black Patriots and Loyalists, when I was speaking, it was a conference on the black diaspora, and I met many distinguished people there. After I finished talking, there was a woman who liked my talk who was sitting in the back row. And I went down and sat down next to her. I noticed her name was Robeson. So I asked, was she related to Paul Robeson? And sure enough, he was her grandfather, Susan Robeson, the great independent filmmaker, who was also a student of African languages and music, and who gave a performance there which drew on the power of the Robesons, of whom she is a marvelous incarnation. How should we talk about Paul Robeson? Let's see. You remember Thoreau on civil disobedience? That you have the power to say no to a constitution which purports to be the slave's constitution and mine, that you have the power to say no to a government which seized half of Mexico. We're on it, just about, here in Colorado. The War of Aggression of 1846, 1848, that you have the power to say no. That is the tradition in which Paul Robeson is a giant. Martin Luther King, at the end of his life, he was murdered. His family does not believe that James Earl Ray did it. That doesn't count for anything around here, except people like me. In 1967, on April 4th, he gave his speech, A Time to Break Silence, about Vietnam, which, to this day, Barack Obama's old preacher, who got a bad rap, he said, Martin Luther King said, I had a dream. Barack Obama says I have a drum. I campaigned for Obama. He's kept us out of war with Iran. I'm not inclined to knock Obama. I detest, that's probably too, I mean, I don't devote that much traditional life. But I do not consider the so-called Republican Party, which is not a conservative party. It's an imperial, authoritarian, racist party. I don't consider what it offers us respectable. But Obama has saved us a bit from some of this. I have a dream. I have the dream of freedom. Who pioneered that dream? Let's see. Fred Douglass pioneered that dream. Harriet Tubman pioneered that dream. You just saw something about somebody of that stature who pioneered that dream. Whom people grow up seeing in Bangladesh and fighting for independence in Bangladesh, and whose words and words about whom come to them. What American speaks to them? Is it Louis Armstrong? This guy was as great a figure as Louis Armstrong. When I came here, I knew about Paul Robeson. I used to tell classes about it. The only student I knew who'd heard of Paul Robeson, she didn't know who he was particularly, was Condi. Right? Because you black, you might have heard from Paul Robeson, right? You at the University of Denver, which means you're not black for the most part, unless you work at the University of Denver at the time. You might hear of Paul Robeson. I want to talk about the blacklist. And I want to talk about it in the following way. There is a habit here of small people, of defaming large people like my sister-in-law's father, Izzy Stone, I.F. Stone, the great journalist, and other people. Paul being most among them. for allegedly being traitors to the United States. In what way was he a traitor? Let's see. He fought for equal liberty. He fought against racism. If that makes you a traitor to the United States, I would like to say that shows what is rotten about America. That is the America founded on slavery, and I'm a John Evans professor, so I'm writing about him for the university now, about Sand Creek, which he sent. It wasn't just Chipping. It was Evans. Sand Creek is the foundation of Denver, and the extinction, the extermination, to use the word of the Civil War, of indigenous people is America, from the Pequot Massacre and the foundation of Harvard in 1638 on down. America, as Rap Brown said, racism is as American as apple pie. This is a wonderful integrated group, multinational group. We want a society which reflects that spirit. We're going to have to fight for it. We've got a lot of the society that don't like a pretty conservative president because he That's America today. We have in America today, Paul Robeson fought for unions. He sang on picket lines here. He sang when any cause came up. He was a man of the people. He was not a man for them. He believed that civil rights and the power united of all the people is what would change things. If we want that kind of society, we're going to have to learn this story and tell it. Between King's speech on April 4th, 1967, and the murder of Martin Luther King on April 4th, 1968, he became a nonviolent democratic socialist trying to organize a poor people's movement led by people who would take action to get equal rights and get food. In whose spirit did he do that? I think the man we just saw is one of the people in whose spirit he did that. And what happened to him for doing that? Gee whiz, he got shot. All his FBI protection was withdrawn. My friend Vincent Harding thinks he was shot by the government. I think that might be true too. I think it's certainly true that Paul Robeson was spied upon, harassed, and poisoned by the U.S. government and by Britain. I don't know if you know about Operation Northwoods, but it was a plan to have CIA people dress up as Cubans and kill some Americans as a pretext after the Cuban Missile Crisis for going into Cuba. John F. Kennedy was wise enough to head that off. It could be that it has nothing to do with the mysteries of Kennedy's assassination. You may have heard of Phil Oakes. Phil was in Africa, and somebody attacked his voice. You ever hear of somebody beating somebody up? Paul got beaten up in Rutgers. Anybody hear of anybody getting his voice attacked? Who would have that idea? Who would have worked that out? Now, I say this very sharply because Paul Robeson saw fascism. He went and met with Jews in Germany, and he traveled in Europe when fascism was coming. And that was before he spoke out about the Spanish Civil War. He went to the Soviet Union, which actually did free nationalities. Sorry to tell the two-bit ideologues here. Tsarism was the prison house of nations, and it was the Soviet Union that freed them. Who was the great anti-colonial force in the world from 1919 on who said that all the peoples must be free? Gee whiz. It was the Soviet Union. And in our realm, it was Paul Robeson who was blacklisted for it. Who fought hardest in World War II? There were 12 Nazi divisions along the front at Normandy in 1944. There were 212 German divisions and 6 million fascist soldiers along the front at Stalingrad in 1943. Gosh, it must have been way out for like the Soviet Union. Time magazine made Stalin the Man of the Year that year. Now, I think Stalin was a monster. but I noticed this is all whited out, just like Paul Robeson is whited out. I think those of us who are scholars and care about scholarship, as well as those of us who care about humanity, have an obligation to call forth the memory of Paul Robeson and to learn from, no kidding, this guy was way ahead of us, the relationship that all of us have to Africa. If you think that America has life through jazz, if you think that America has life through spiritualism, if you think that Paul Robeson's voice reached out across the world and he was the greatest artist, American artist of the 20th century, if you notice, you might notice that the gifts of Africa are international. And that all of us who fight for freedom need to fight for that. And that Paul Robeson is in the forefront of that fight. I love Paul Robeson, and I will stand with Paul Robeson against any kind of intimidation and blacklist and monstrousness by a government which seems to specialize even under Obama in spying and deceit and anti-democracy and, what's that word? Fascist ideas.
So we deliberately left some time for conversation, questions, comments, anything that people would like to say.
Well, it was interesting that Pete Seeger died
It
about a
was
month ago. And
just seeing him.
his life paralleled him in a lot of
Yeah,
ways.
Pete Seeger was another giant, and just to see his image on the film too, it's just yeah. I feel some sadness when I watch that clip. And by the way, all those clips come from a documentary film, a wonderful documentary film. It's called Here I Stand. Paul Robeson, Here I Stand, and our library has a copy of it. So, it's 2 hours long, so I tried to excerpt a few really good clips. Yes, sir.
I'm sitting here listening to Paul Robeson sing, and maybe you can help me on this one. Do we have a book which examines the civil rights movement, not only looking at Paul Robeson, if not this book should be written, but African-American entertainers? I was thinking of Lena Horne. I was thinking of from Billie Holiday and Strange Fruit. And you know, the civil rights movement has paid a great deal of attention to the legal aspects of it and to marchers and protesters, but not so much, it seems to me, to how musicians advance the cause of civil rights. And if there is such a book, I sure would like to know the title of it. And if not, why don't you write it?
Well, if there isn't any one book, there's a bunch of different books that have snippets of that. And actually, one of my favorites is one that people don't talk about a lot. And it's not about the civil rights movement per se, but it's about a lot of stuff that happened before it. It's a book by Angela Davis called Black Feminism, Blues, Legacies, and Black Feminism. And really talks about Billie Holiday and a lot of the blues women and the groundwork that they laid in their art, before the civil rights movement. There's a lot of books and ethnomusicology books that have chapters on, how the music of the civil rights movement was, sort of in the groundwork of lots of the music that happened, beginning with the spirituals. So that might be a book that you would write on. If you put it all together.
Also, to put together, a lot of them women.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any of you know, was Robeson ever in Denver? Ever stop here?
I don't know the answer to that.
Do you know, Trustee?
I don't know the
He
answer.
traveled around the country
Yeah.
supporting strikes. And actually, I met a conservative guy whose parents were in were around the Communist Party and they're friends of Robeson. And so this guy said, well, after singing on the picket line visiting his parents, he sang this.
Yeah, I'm guessing that he
So I might have
was.
been at that.
He must
I'm guessing that he was at some point, but I have not ever seen a reference to it.
We'll look it up.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to contradict you, Alan, but I don't think Robeson would like to be remembered as being 20 times smarter than all of us. I think he'd like to be remembered as one of us and as in it with us. I came to know and love Paul Robeson as a child because my parents loved him, and a lot of what I think of him comes from that, especially from my mother. And one thing that I think is really important is to remember the wholeness of everything he did, and how it is a very complicated whole and how it's all moving in one direction. I don't think we should just write off the movies with their very obvious, the Hollywood movies with their very obvious racism and just say, oh, well, that's all sort of an embarrassment. They are very much, Robeson was doing something in those movies. Hollywood was, there's something really going on in them that we need to value. It's tricky, it's difficult. Just as in doing The Emperor Jones, it's tricky, it's difficult, but there's something really to value in that. And you were talking about the spirituals and how absolutely fundamental that was to Robeson. But he's not finally going to tell God about this. Finally, what he wants to do is to be part of changing the world. He was a great internationalist, and he was a socialist. He started from the experience of black people, but he was thinking about all people. He was thinking about trying to change the world for all people.
Yeah, those points are really well taken. There is a really extensive piece in this film about his film career, and attempts to sort of, make some of those points that you made. I think that he himself just felt very angry about the way in which the things that he was trying to do got twisted and distorted.
Oh no, of course.
So that was
how could he not? But there's still something extraordinary there.
Yeah, and the reason why I chose that song about "I'm going to tell God all of my troubles" was because Robeson was also steeped in the ways in which West African culture really influenced the spirituals, and so that God is not the God out there. That God is the God that's in the world, the God that's sort of a partner in social action. So I hope I didn't give this sort of impression that I'm thinking about this otherworldly thing, but that he's really honoring the spirit of the spirit that's present in the African sense. Yeah.
So I agree with you. The reason I said that is that it has come home to me that he learned about 20 languages. And if you Google him on YouTube, you can't find easily his singing in many languages. His relationship with Africa comes from that he mastered so much. If I had to think of somebody who was a linguist who, could have had a conversation with Paul, probably Chomsky. I mean, he was a very unusual man. Now, he was completely a man of the people, and he gave his life for this, as far as I can see. So I don't think we're on a different page if we are. I'm sorry about my comments.
Can I say something about the film?
Yes.
In context. Yeah, actually, when I was fortunate to see Robeson, he was already in decline. I asked him about his film, and he said he was really disappointed with, especially Song of Freedom, which was supposed to be, this positive film, but actually it was more of the same at the end. But the one film that he was proud of and wanted to be remembered by was this film that I mentioned, The Proud. So I really again recommend that you see that film.
Yeah.
You should see everything else, of course, curiosity, but you should really see that film.
Yeah. And I should say this film, Here I Stand, also does a really good job of portraying the humanity of Paul with all of his flaws, his personal flaws, and it really is. So I would really recommend it. It's really worth seeing because it's one of those rare films where you really feel you get to know this person in his full glory with all his warts, but he still comes out as an amazing person. When you think of him in that way. Yeah.
I was just going to ask you, could you tell us a little bit, it was a tease, tell us how you came to know Robeson and interacted with him.
Well, it's a long story, so I'll give you the shorter part, which is my part. I was in 1971 a delegate to the World Youth Forum, which was with International Girl Figure at one point. And Robeson was honored by them in 1943. And I have some other connections also. The song that was written in imitation of Old Man River was by Haider Khan, who was a great singer, activist in India, just passed away recently, a few years ago. He was a student at Columbia in 1949, and he knew Robeson, in fact was a disciple of Robeson, and I think was inspired by Robeson's use of music to do the same when he went back to India. So I have kind of an entree that maybe I was just lucky to have, because he wasn't seeing too many people. It was in the 70s that I saw him. He was living in Philadelphia with his sister, and he was obviously ill. He no longer had his singing voice, and he wasn't appearing in the public because he didn't want the public to remember him as he looked then. He wanted to be remembered the way he was in his prime. But he was a tremendously encouraging person, I must say. His very presence, made you feel that here you were with a person who truly embodied an entire era, who personified fighting for the good cause, and who never gave up. So I will always remember that.
Second question. Can you explain us the instrument? It was great.
Well, you can explain it better than I.
It's a wind instrument, when you pump that, the air goes inside the chamber, and then you have the leads, then when you press the keys, and the air releases through the leads, and it just makes the music.
That's great.
Yeah, so it's called harmonium. So it's harmoniously good.
Running out, I just wanted to say thank you very much. It was
Oh,
wonderful.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
I have a question that not so much a comment, but for us to think about in what we might learn from this, not only the movie, but also the poetry and the music that has been shared here and now, with respect to the climate change issue. Secretary Kerry, I noted, is in Indonesia, and once again has made a plea for concerted action, and rightly points the finger at the United States and at China, having just come from China and expressing, sharing words of encouragement that something might be done. What has been on my mind for a long time, ever since becoming aware of this issue and the IPCC reports that have now been done, I think for the fourth time, the role of music and what it might bring to a nonviolent resolution, not solution, but a resolution. What would it look like to have a glide path, so to speak, from now down to the year 2050? If the science is right, we need to reduce carbon emissions by an average of about 2% per annum until then. One image I have is standing on the corner of Evans and South University Boulevard, trying to imagine what it would look like if only 1/5 of the vehicle traffic were passing. Or you could, if you've recently been on a plane, maybe 1/5 as many planes flying, or whatever. How might we achieve, lurch toward a nonviolent future? And that brings me to the role of music. And I draw from this yet one more example of how music, say in the 1960s, We Shall Overcome, and the power, the central role that simple tune had. And now I was not aware of the centrality of Old Man River here in Robeson's how the words became transmuted over time, how he creatively and imaginatively infused that tune to empower not only people here, but as Art and others have noted around the world. So what might be the environmental analog of that? What seeds of tunes?
Actually, the environmentalists in India are using this song, along with many other songs in their cause. But my Guruji, he has been a musician all his life, and he's a very spiritual person. So perhaps he has some words of wisdom about how to use music to enhance this harmony with nature and also to build a non-violent environment.
Well, the primary effect of music is just love and affection. And I think if everybody tries to learn music, there won't be no violence at all.
Well, I think music can be twisted. We know
Yes,
that
it
with
can.
Wagner and some other stuff. Music definitely can be twisted, but I mean, I would really endorse what you said about the fact that, at least in our Western, maybe I wouldn't even say Western, in our American myopic kind of vision, we forget how powerful music is. To most people around the world, they understand that when you want something important to happen, you need to have music. And that it is so powerful. I just took a bunch of students to Selma, Alabama over the interterm as part of a course that I was teaching on the music of the Civil Rights Movement. And people just really amazing, really touched by what happens when you bring music into play. And so many people just forget that. So I think it would just be really amazing just to imagine what it would be like for music to be in the service of protecting our environments and nature, and what would be dreamed up. And not just people performing for other people, but people joining in music. Kathy, I'll embarrass you here. Kathy's one of my students here from Colorado Women's College. We did a course together on the spirituals, and she participated in the national conference we had. And it was like a really powerful experience, right?
Yes.
Just a quick comment on how wonderful it was today. It was an old man river moment because two American Jews, Jerome Kern and Oscar Hammerstein II, wrote Old Man River in 1928 as part of Showboat. And then we had Paul Robeson wrestling with it, basically,
Right.
and then to listen to our two distinguished singers internationalize it. It doesn't get any better than that.
That's really true.
This is absolutely sensational.
Yes.
I went to Palestine with the Civil Rights delegation. It was headed by Dorothy Kaufman and Vincent Hart. And Dorothy would begin every gathering we had by singing. And the truth is that there was the great black tradition of singing. There's the Union tradition of singing. You know, if you think about Phil Oakes a little bit, or Pete Seeger, you can get quite a lot of anti-war song. And the fact is that many of us grew up with singing in the 60s.
I ain't marching anymore.
I ain't marching anymore. But, and one of the things about this is that America has a great tradition of this outside of the commercialization of it. It has less a great tradition of poetry, but it also has a great tradition of poetry. Poetry isn't as recognized in America as it is. If you think of Neruda and various other people, you get an idea of what poetry is like when it is a national art like singing is here. But to the extent that any of us can help create or participate in or spread songs about the earth and about preserving it and about the man who still waits, that would be a good thing.
Yes.
I want to make some response about music and poems. I think those are wonderful ways for the grassroots or less privileged people to express themselves. They give them the chance to let their voice heard like the other people outside.
Yes.
And at the same time, it can increase their self-confidence.
Absolutely.
And for the outsiders, they can understand their lives, their situation through the music. So that's a wonderful way.
Yeah, I agree. I want to make a comment about one of these amazing workshops that happened in our National Conference on Spirituals last summer that we had on campus. We had a group of neuroscientists who came in and presented a summary of some of the latest research about what happens in the brain when people sing. A lot of us know the experience of singing and feeling more confident, but what they focused on more than anything else was that when people sing, and especially when they sing certain kinds of songs that are in a minor key or certain kinds of formulations of those songs, what happens is that their mental clarity gets better. And they related it to what happened with slaves in slavery. So say you're a slave and you're working all day in the fields and you've been abused and beat up and you're being humiliated, and at the end of the day, you're tempted to do something that will be irrational and not helpful to your family or whatever. When you sing, then you're able to formulate a realistic plan for how you might escape, how you might confront slavery, something that has a chance of working because your thinking is so clear. And I just think that as we get distorted around all the messages that people give about climate change, well, yes, the earth is warming, but it's not really human-made, or things like that. If we have people singing about it, we might be able to get past a lot of that noise to get to the reality. So I don't know. I mean, it's, to me, I'm excited about thinking about it.
Yeah. If I could add something like that. So I went to school with Andy Goodman in New York, Wilson School, from 1st to 4th grade, and he and I were friends. And I didn't see that much of him because I moved away. And he went to Mississippi in 1964. And I'd been on a freedom ride and I didn't go. And he was murdered there with Michael Schwerner and James Shane. And that caused a great crisis in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the Freedom Summer Project. Yeah. And Vincent Harding told me that what Bob Moses said to everybody was, you should call your folks, you should call home, you should spend the day thinking about it. Anybody who wants to go home, we won't hold it against them. They realize immediately when they disappear, they'd be killed. And they spent the day singing civil rights songs, as did the people who really martyred themselves doing civil disobedience for healing the world, curing segregation and healing the world. And if there is a power greater than that of song, I don't know what it is.
Well, I just want to acknowledge the time. Many of us, we were advertised as 12 to 1:30, so, anyone who wants to leave can certainly leave, but, some of us are happy to stay around for a few more minutes to talk, but I just want to respect people's time and thank all of you